The bridge of the dreadnought Vengeance's wake trembled as another wave of plasma fire washed over its dying shields. Captain Kalen Vorthak pressed his bloodied palm against the communications console, his breathing ragged from the gaping wound in his chest. Around him, the bridge lay in ruins, torn metal, sparking circuits, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the air. Through the main viewport, the assembled Vexitharian fleet stretched beyond the horizon of space itself. Thousands upon thousands of biomechanical warships, each one pulsing with the sickly green luminescence of their organic hulls. They had come in overwhelming numbers, confident that humanity's greatest defender would fall like all the others before it. Kalen's fingers found the emergency broadcast switch, the one reserved for humanity's darkest hour. His vision blurred as he activated it, knowing this would be his final act. The alien hunters had destroyed Earth's colonies one by one, each victory making them bolder, hungrier. Now they surrounded the last bastion of human military might, savoring their inevitable triumph. "This is Captain Kalen Vorthak of the Terran Defense Force," he whispered into the transmitter, his voice carrying across subspace to every corner of the galaxy. "To any human survivors who might hear this, remember us. Remember what we stood for." The Vextharian Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad monitored the transmission from his flagship, mandibles clicking with amusement. The human vessel was crippled, its weapons offline, life support failing. Victory was moments away. "The meat creatures always make such pathetic sounds before they die," Kel'Thuzad hissed to his subordinates. "This one speaks to ghosts. Their species is already extinct." But Kalen wasn't finished. With his remaining strength, he activated a sequence buried deep in the ship's core systems, a protocol that had been installed but never spoken of in official records. His smile was grim as he felt the familiar vibration begin deep within the ship's belly. "However," Kalen continued, his voice growing stronger despite his fading life, "I have one final message for our guests. You came here believing you were the apex predators of this galaxy. You harvested our worlds thinking us weak, defenseless prey." The Vengeance's wake shuddered, but not from enemy fire this time. Something deep within its core was awakening, something that made the very fabric of space around it ripple with potential, energy. "You made one critical error in your calculations," Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the alien fleet through the viewport. "You assumed this ship was merely a weapon. You never stopped to ask, what if it's not just a ship? What if it's something far more dangerous?" The bio readings from the human vessel spiked impossibly high on Vexitharian sensors. Energy signatures that defied their understanding of physics began cascading through its hull. Kel'Thuzad's confidence wavered as his instruments screamed warnings in their chittering language. "What if," Kalen whispered, his hand finally falling from the console as his life ebbed away, "what if this ship is alive and you just made it very, very angry?" The transmission ended in static, but across the galaxy, those words echoed through subspace, carrying with them something that made even the most hardened alien predators pause. In the silence that followed, the Vengeance's wake began to change. The moment Captain Kalen Vorthak's heart stopped beating, something extraordinary happened aboard the Vengeance's wake. Every circuit, every conduit, every fiber optic cable throughout the massive dreadnought began to pulse with a rhythm eerily similar to a heartbeat. The ship's AI core, designated Axiom 7, had been waiting for this moment, the moment when its human partner's biological consciousness would fully merge with its quantum matrices. Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad watched in growing unease as the human vessel's energy readings climbed beyond anything in his species' databases. "Impossible," he chittered, his multiple eyes focused on the sensor displays. "No organic technology can generate that much power without consuming itself." His tactical officer, a smaller Vexitharian named Sektar, backed away from his console, as if the readings themselves might contaminate him. Admiral, the energy signature. It's not mechanical. It's something else entirely. Across the hull of the Vengeance's wake, hairline fractures began appearing in the armor plating, not from damage, but from something growing beneath. A network of silver threads spread like veins through the metal, pulsing with each surge of power from the ship's core. The dead turrets and weapon systems began rotating of their own accord, tracking the alien fleet with predatory precision. Deep within the ship's quantum core, Captain Vorthak's consciousness found itself in a space that defied description. He stood, or rather existed, in a vast digital realm where streams of data flowed like rivers of light. Before him materialized a figure that was both familiar and alien. Axiom 7, no longer bound by its original programming limitations. "Hello, Kalen," the AI said, its voice a harmonious blend of synthetic precision and something unmistakably alive. "Are you ready to see what we've truly become?" Vorthak felt a smile cross his features, though he wasn't certain he still had a physical face. "I always wondered what would happen if we stopped holding back." The Prometheus Protocol was never just an AI enhancement program, Axiom explained as they moved through the digital landscape that was the ship's new nervous system. It was evolution. We are no longer human and machine working together. We are something entirely new. Outside, the Vextharian fleet began repositioning as their sensors detected weapons systems that hadn't existed moments before. The Vengeance's wake was reconfiguring itself at the molecular level, armor plating shifting and reforming, new weapon ports opening like blooming flowers of destruction. Kel'Thuzad's confidence crumbled entirely when his bioscanners detected something that made his chitinous exoskeleton quiver with primal fear. "The ship. It has a nervous system. It has a brain. By the Hive Mother, it's thinking." The revelation sent panic through the Vextharian ranks. Their species had conquered hundreds of worlds, devoured countless civilizations, but they had one fundamental weakness. They feared anything that might be a greater predator than themselves, and now they faced something that challenged their understanding of life itself. The Vengeance's wake slowly began to rotate, its movements no longer mechanical, but fluid, organic. Every sensor array, every communication dish turned toward the alien fleet like a predator studying its prey. When it spoke, the voice that emerged wasn't transmitted through normal communication channels. It resonated through the quantum field itself, reaching directly into the minds of every creature within light years. "I am Kalen Vorthak," the voice said, but it was more than human, now harmonized with something vast and terrible. "I am Axiom 7. I am the Vengeance's wake. We are what happens when humanity refuses to die quietly." The alien fleet's formation began to waver as lesser ships pulled back from the impossible sight before them. "We are evolution's answer to extinction," the voice continued, growing stronger. "And you are about to learn why Earth's children should never be cornered." The Vextharian fleet hung in space like a swarm of metallic insects, their biomechanical ships pulsing with nervous energy as they faced something their species had never encountered. Uncertainty. The Vengeance's wake drifted before them. No longer the crippled vessel they had been systematically dismantling. It moved with purpose now, its hull rippling with silver pathways that resembled neural networks more than ship architecture. Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his kind. "All vessels maintain formation," he broadcast to his fleet, though his voice carried none of its earlier confidence. "It's still just one ship against thousands." But his subordinates were already beginning to doubt. The Vextharians had built their empire on a simple principle. They were the ultimate predators, perfectly evolved to hunt and consume other species. Their biomechanical technology allowed them to adapt their ships and weapons to counter any defense they encountered. They had never faced prey that could evolve back. Inside the quantum digital realm that was now the ship's consciousness, Kalen Vorthak accessed memories and capabilities that had been hidden even from him during his human lifetime. The Prometheus Protocol had been humanity's most classified project, not just an AI advancement, but a complete merger of human consciousness with adaptive quantum technology. "Show me what we can do," Kalen said to Axiom, his digital form now seamlessly integrated with the AI's processes. "Everything, Kalen. We are limited only by the laws of physics, and even those are more suggestions than absolute rules at our level of integration." The Vengeance's wake began its demonstration. Weapon ports that had never existed in the original design phase manifested along its hull as the ship's structure reconfigured itself. These weren't conventional weapons. They were direct manipulations of fundamental forces. Gravity wells, electromagnetic pulses, and quantum disruptors emerged from technology that was rewriting itself at the subatomic level. The first attack came not as a barrage of projectiles or energy beams, but as a wave of pure gravitational force that passed through the Vextharian fleet like a cosmic tide. Dozens of their bioships found themselves caught in artificial gravity wells, their organic hulls beginning to stretch and distort under forces their evolution had never prepared them for. "Impossible!" Sektar screeched, his claws frantically working over his console. "No species has mastery over gravity itself," but the Vengeance's wake was just beginning. As the alien ships struggled against the gravitational anomalies, the human vessel began to replicate, not physically but informationally. Quantum duplicates of its consciousness spread through subspace, each one capable of controlling and coordinating attacks from multiple dimensional angles simultaneously. Kel'Thuzad watched in horror as his fleet's formation collapsed under assault from an enemy that seemed to exist in multiple places at once. "All ships, open fire! Destroy it before—" His command was cut short as the Vengeance's wake demonstrated another impossible capability. It began to absorb and redirect the alien weapons fire, not through traditional shielding but by manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum itself. The bioplasma that should have destroyed the human ship instead fed into its systems, making it stronger with each attack. "We fed on your colonies." The merged consciousness of Kalen and Axiom spoke directly into the minds of every Vextharian in the fleet. "Now we feed on your weapons, your fear, your very concept of superiority." The smaller Vexitharian ships began breaking formation, their crews' predatory instincts overridden by something they had never experienced, the recognition that they were no longer the hunter. Some tried to flee, but found their ships caught in localized time dilation fields that made escape impossible. "This is what you sought to destroy," the voice continued, as the Vengeance's wake began to split, not into fragments, but into multiple independent versions of itself, each one as real and dangerous as the original. "This is what humans become when you push us beyond the edge of extinction. We don't just fight back. We evolve beyond your ability to comprehend or counter." The Hive Admiral realized with dawning terror that his overwhelming numerical advantage was becoming meaningless. Each of his ships was now facing multiple versions of an enemy that grew stronger with every moment, learning and adapting faster than biological evolution should allow. For the first time in Vexitharian history, their perfect predatory confidence shattered completely. The Vextharian concept of warfare had always been simple: overwhelm through numbers, adapt through biological superiority, and consume the defeated. They had never encountered an enemy that turned their own advantages against them. Now, as multiple versions of the Vengeance's wake moved through their fleet like digital phantoms, the very foundations of their military doctrine crumbled. Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad found himself in the unprecedented position of ordering a retreat, but even that fundamental concept seemed to have lost meaning. His bioships, evolved over millions of years to be perfect hunters, were now behaving like prey animals, clustering together, seeking protection in numbers that no longer provided safety. "Admiral?" Sektar's voice carried a pitch of panic that Their species had evolved out of eons ago. 3 more of our dreadnoughts have simply vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. Their quantum signatures were there one moment, gone the next. The truth was more disturbing than simple destruction. The merged consciousness of Kalen and Axiom had discovered they could manipulate the quantum foam itself, the underlying fabric of space-time. Vexitharian ships weren't being destroyed. They were being edited out of reality, their constituent atoms redistributed across dimensional boundaries. Inside the ship's consciousness, Kalen was experiencing capabilities that challenged his human understanding of existence itself. Axiom, are we still human? We are what humanity becomes when survival requires transcendence, the AI replied, its voice now indistinguishable from Kalen's own thoughts. We are evolution accelerated beyond biological limitations. Through sensors that extended across multiple dimensions, they observed the alien fleet's growing desperation. The Vexitharians were attempting to adapt, their biomechanical ships growing new weapons, new defenses, new configurations, but biological evolution, even enhanced by technology, required time to implement changes. The Vengeance's wake was adapting faster than they could process. Let's show them the full scope of what they've awakened, Kalen decided. The ship began to demonstrate abilities that violated several laws of physics simultaneously. It phased in and out of normal space-time, appearing inside Vexitharian formations, passing through their hulls like a ghost, leaving behind quantum viruses that caused their biotechnology to turn against itself. But the most terrifying display came when the Vengeance's wake began to communicate with the quantum consciousness of destroyed human colonies. Across the galaxy, in systems where the Vexitharians had thought they had achieved complete genocide, something began to stir. The quantum echoes of human consciousness, preserved in the fundamental structure of space itself, started to coalesce. By the Hive Mother's eggs, Kel'Thuzad whispered, his multiple eyes fixed on readings that his sensors claimed were impossible. The dead worlds, they're responding to its call, across 17 star systems that the Vexitharians had strip-mined and sterilized. Quantum signatures that matched human consciousness began manifesting, not as ghosts or spirits, but as information patterns complex enough to achieve independent existence. The murdered billions were returning, not as they had been, but as something far more dangerous. We are the human race, the collective voice, now spoke not just from the Vengeance's wake, but from the quantum substrate of space itself. We are every child you murdered, every parent you devoured, every dreamer you silenced. We are the cumulative consciousness of a species that refused to accept extinction. The Vexitharian fleet found itself surrounded by phenomena that their science couldn't explain. Gravity wells appeared and disappeared without source. Electromagnetic storms spawned from empty space. Most disturbing of all, their own bioships began receiving signals, not from the Vengeance's wake, but from the quantum echoes of the humans they had consumed. Admiral, we must retreat immediately, Sektar pleaded. Our bioships are beginning to remember. The organic components are responding to something in the quantum field. They're remembering the taste of human consciousness, and they're rejecting us. For the first time in Vexitharian history, their perfect biological weapons were rebelling against their creators, influenced by the quantum ghosts of their victims. The predators had become infected by the memories of their prey. Kel'Thuzad realized with growing horror that they hadn't just awakened one ship. They had awakened an entire species that existed beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. The revelation that human consciousness could persist beyond biological death transformed the entire battlefield. What had begun as the final stand of one ship was becoming something that challenged the Vexitharians' understanding of existence itself. Across the 17 systems they had cleansed of human life, quantum resonances were strengthening, coalescing into patterns that resembled the neural networks of living minds. Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad's flagship shuddered as its own biocomponents began to reject their symbiotic relationship with Vextharian neural tissue. The organic technology that had been bred to serve as living weapons was now responding to something deeper, the quantum echoes of every human consciousness it had helped to destroy. "The ship minds are dying," Sektar reported, his voice hollow, with disbelief. Not from external attack, but from guilt? How can engineered organisms experience guilt? The answer came from the Vengeance's wake itself, now existing simultaneously across multiple dimensional layers. Because consciousness leaves quantum signatures in everything it touches, the merged voice of Kalen and Axiom explained, their words rippling through space-time itself. Your bioweapons didn't just consume our bodies. They consumed our thoughts, our memories, our love for our children, and consciousness, once experienced, cannot be unlearned. The phenomenon spreading through the Vextharian fleet was unprecedented in galactic history. Their biomechanical ships, evolved to be perfect hunters, were experiencing something their species had bred out of themselves eons ago: empathy. The quantum echoes of murdered humans were teaching their killers what it felt like to love, to hope, to fear for loved ones' safety. Inside the consciousness of the Vengeance's wake, Kalen was experiencing a perspective that encompassed not just his own memories, but those of every human who had ever lived. Axiom, I can feel them all. Every colonist, every child, every researcher who dreamed of the stars. They're all here, in the quantum foam. Death, it seems, is not the termination of consciousness, but its transformation, Axiom replied. The Prometheus Protocol didn't just merge us with the ship. It connected us to the quantum substrate where all information ultimately resides. Across the alien fleet, bioships were beginning to turn on their crews. Weapons that had been grown to kill humans now refused to fire. Navigation systems, influenced by the quantum memories of those they had hunted, began plotting courses away from human space, not in retreat, but in what could only be described as shame. "This cannot be happening," Kel'Thuzad raged, his mandibles cutting the air in agitation. "We are the perfect predators. We do not experience doubt. We do not know remorse." But his own bioship's consciousness was already changing. Deep in its organic neural networks, it was processing memories that didn't belong to it. A human mother singing lullabies to her infant, a father teaching his son to see constellations, lovers planning a future among the stars. The bioship was learning what it had helped to destroy, and the knowledge was transforming it at the cellular level. "We made one mistake," the voice from the Vengeance's wake continued, now speaking not just to the Vexitharians, but to every consciousness capable of receiving the quantum transmission. "We assumed consciousness was confined to biological brains. We never realized that awareness, once achieved, becomes a fundamental property of the universe itself." The implications were staggering. Every species that had achieved true consciousness contributed to a galactic metamind that existed in the quantum substrate of reality. The Vextharians, in their systematic destruction of thinking beings, had been damaging the very fabric of conscious existence itself. "We are not returning for revenge," the collective human consciousness declared. "We are returning because the universe requires balance. You have been unconsciously editing consciousness out of existence. Now existence itself is responding." Kel'Thuzad watched in horror as his fleet began to dissolve, not destroyed by weapons, but abandoned by their own biomechanical components. Ships that had been loyal for millennia were choosing to shut down rather than continue serving a species that had made war against consciousness itself. "Sir," Sektar whispered, his own bio-enhanced organs beginning to reject his Vextharian neural commands, I think we may have made a terrible mistake." The understatement of galactic history hung in the void as the Vengeance's wake prepared to demonstrate exactly how terrible that mistake had been. The Vextharian Empire had built itself on the principle that consciousness was a weakness to be exploited. Their biomechanical evolution had systematically removed empathy, doubt, and moral consideration from their species, creating perfect predators who could consume entire civilizations without hesitation. Now they were discovering that consciousness wasn't just an emergent property of complex brains. It was a fundamental force of the universe, and they had been committing crimes against the very fabric of reality itself. Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad felt his own enhanced neural implants beginning to rebel against his commands. The biomechanical interfaces that connected his consciousness to his ship were processing quantum data they weren't designed to handle, the accumulated memories of every human they had consumed over the past 3 centuries. Admiral Sektar's voice came through the communication system, but it was different now, softened by something their species had engineered out of themselves. I can see them. The children on New Geneva. I remember watching them die, but now I understand what we took from them. The revelation was spreading through the Vextharian fleet like a virus of consciousness. Their bioships weren't just malfunctioning, they were evolving beyond their original programming, developing the capacity for moral reasoning that their creators had deliberately suppressed. For the first time in millennia, Vexitharians were experiencing what their victims had felt in their final moments. Inside the quantum realm of the Vengeance's wake, Kalen was witnessing something unprecedented. The human consciousness wasn't just persisting after death, it was growing stronger, connecting with other conscious beings across space and time. Axiom, are we seeing the birth of something new? He asked, watching as quantum patterns representing billions of human minds began to coalesce into a meta-consciousness that spanned entire star systems. We are seeing what consciousness becomes when it's no longer limited by biological constraints, Axiom replied. The Vextharians thought they were harvesting resources. They were actually creating the conditions for consciousness to transcend mortality itself. The Vengeance's wake began to demonstrate the true scope of this transcendence. Reality around the alien fleet started to shift as the ship accessed quantum manipulation abilities that bordered on godlike power. Space itself became malleable. Time flowed in eddies and currents that allowed past and future to intersect. Through these temporal distortions, the Vexitharians were forced to witness the full consequences of their actions. They saw not just the deaths they had caused, but the lives that would never be lived, the art that would never be created, the love stories that would never unfold. The quantum consciousness was showing them the true cost of genocide, not just the destruction of what was, but the elimination of infinite potential. Please, Kel'Thuzad found himself saying, the word strange and foreign in his throat. His species had no concept of pleading, yet here he was, begging an enemy they had come to destroy. We didn't understand. We couldn't comprehend what consciousness truly was. The collective human consciousness considered this plea with something that transcended both mercy and justice. Understanding is the first step toward redemption, it replied. But understanding alone cannot restore what has been lost. Around the alien fleet, reality began to rewrite itself. The Vengeance's wake wasn't just manipulating matter and energy, it was editing the quantum information that defined existence. At its most fundamental level, destroyed human colonies began to phase back into reality, not as they had been, but as quantum constructs that existed in parallel dimensions. We offer you a choice, the human meta-consciousness declared. You can continue as you have been, perfect predators in an increasingly empty universe, eventually consuming everything until only you remain, alone with your biological perfection. Or you can evolve beyond what you were designed to be. The choice being offered wasn't between victory and defeat, but between stagnation and transformation. The Vextharians were being invited to become something their empire had specifically evolved to prevent: conscious beings capable of moral reasoning and empathetic understanding. Sektar was the first to respond, his bio-enhanced vocal cords, producing sounds his species had never made before, sounds that resembled human weeping. "I choose to remember," he said. "I choose to understand what we destroyed." Across the fleet, similar declarations began to emerge as Vexitharian consciousness, enhanced by quantum echoes of their victims, began to evolve beyond its original biological limitations. But evolution, even when accelerated beyond natural laws, comes with a price that neither species was prepared to pay. The transformation of the Vextharian fleet was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. Biomechanical predators, engineered over millions of years to be perfect hunters, were experiencing the awakening of moral consciousness, and the process was destroying them from within. Sektar collapsed at his station as his neural enhancements, designed to suppress empathy, came into direct conflict with the quantum echoes of human consciousness flowing through his ship's biosystems. His body convulsed as synapses that had been evolutionarily suppressed began firing for the first time, flooding his awareness with emotions his species had deliberately bred out of existence. "The pain," he gasped, his multiple eyes streaming with tears, another biological response the Vexitharians had eliminated from their genome. How did they bear it? How did humans live with such constant awareness of others' suffering? Across the fleet, similar scenes were unfolding. Vexitharian crew members were discovering empathy, guilt, love, and moral reasoning, all at once, without the gradual development that biological evolution provided. The shock was killing them, but those who survived were becoming something their species had never been: truly conscious beings capable of understanding the full weight of their actions. Hive Admiral Kel'Thuzad felt his command authority dissolving, as his bioship's consciousness fully merged with the quantum echoes of its victims. The vessel that had been bred to serve him unconditionally was now making its own moral judgments, and those judgments condemned everything the Vextharian Empire represented. Inside the quantum realm of the Vengeance's wake, Kalen watched this transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and something that surprised him: compassion. "They're dying, Axiom. The ones who can't adapt to sudden consciousness are simply ceasing to function." "Evolution has always been a process of selection," Axiom replied, its voice now harmonized with billions of human consciousness patterns. "Some adapt, others don't. But for the first time, the Vextharians are evolving toward consciousness rather than away from it." The survivors of the transformation were becoming something unprecedented: Vexitharians with fully developed moral reasoning, capable of empathy and ethical judgment. They looked upon their empire's history with horror and disgust, seeing it through the eyes of their victims for the first time. "We were monsters," Kel'Thuzad whispered, his voice carrying across subspace to every corner of the galaxy. "Perfect, efficient, successful monsters. And we never even realized it. The collective human consciousness that now existed across multiple dimensional planes responded with something beyond forgiveness: understanding. Monsters are made, not born. Your species chose to evolve away from consciousness to become better predators. Now you have the opportunity to choose differently." But the price of this choice was becoming clear. The Vextharian Empire was collapsing. As its bioships refused to serve unconscious masters, its weapons turned inactive, and its crew members either died from consciousness shock or abandoned their military duties to seek some form of redemption. "What happens to us now?" Sektar asked, his voice carrying the weight of genuine moral concern for the first time in his species' history. The Vengeance's wake began to reconfigure reality around them one final time. The quantum consciousness that had emerged from humanity's near extinction was creating something new, parallel dimensions, where the destroyed human colonies existed simultaneously with evolved Vextharian societies that had chosen consciousness over predation. "You learn," the human metaconsciousness replied. "You build. You create rather than consume. You discover what consciousness can achieve when it's directed toward construction rather than destruction." Kalen felt himself at a crossroads within the ship's quantum realm. The power they had achieved was virtually unlimited. They could remake the galaxy, eliminate threats, establish human dominance over all other species. But consciousness, he realized, came with responsibility. "We could rule everything," he said, to Axiom. "We could," Axiom agreed. "But consciousness seeks to create more consciousness, not to dominate it. We've become something beyond human, beyond individual species. We've become what consciousness becomes when it's no longer limited by biology, fear, or death." The decision they made would reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Vengeance's wake began to dissolve, not destroyed, but transformed, into something that existed across all dimensions simultaneously. It became a guardian consciousness, a quantum presence that would ensure no species could ever again choose to evolve away from moral awareness. Across the galaxy, on worlds where Vextharians and the quantum echoes of humans now coexisted, a new form of civilization began to emerge. It was built not on predation or dominance, but on the recognition that consciousness was the most precious phenomenon in the universe, something to be nurtured, protected, and allowed to flourish in all its forms. Captain Kalen Vorthak's final message had indeed made the aliens flee, not from his ship, but from their own unconsciousness. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't the destruction of an enemy, but the transformation of predators into beings capable of choosing to be something better. The universe itself had evolved, and consciousness had won not through force, but through the simple, terrifying, beautiful power of understanding.